We've had a lot of talking points come out over the last year or so with this Microsoft Activision Blizzard acquisition saga that seems like it's never ending, but I'm hoping it's wrapping up here pretty soon, unless the FTC is actually able to complete this Hail Mary that's currently going on, but we'll find out with that in a day or two now. But there is one talking point that I wanted to look at here today, and it has to do actually with Sony and how they would respond to Microsoft's massive $70 billion acquisition of Activision Blizzard, because one point that's been brought up to me just seems like a colossal waste of money for Sony. I'm going to go over that here today. So if you guys enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button. Helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawn Wave Plus channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So the talking point that I'm referring to right now is Sony buying Square Enix. I don't really know why Sony would buy Square, like, at all. I mean, if you just look at the face of it right now, we of course have seen Sony go out and make acquisitions that feel more strategic than anything else. Bungie being their biggest one so far at like $3 billion. They were very clear that they were buying more or less the expertise of live service games, and we're seeing more and more why that is, with them investing over $2 billion into gaming R&D, so research and development, with a huge focus on live service, which is what Bungie is really an expert in now after going through the years and years of getting Destiny to a decent spot, I guess. I don't know, people complain about Destiny all the time, no matter what, when I'm on Twitter and other social media, but a lot of people still play it every single day. So it seems like Bungie's figured something out there. And I mean, we've seen Sony even have Bungie do assessments of live service games from very storied first party, with reportedly Naughty Dog having their project, their Factions game, shelved because of this. So having strategic acquisitions in place, even if they do cost you billions of dollars from Sony's end, makes sense. However, Square Enix, I don't really see how that would make any sense for Sony to buy at this point. I think the first thing would be the amount of money it would most likely cost. People have been trying to speculate and figure out what that number would be, and a lot of times they'll look at the market cap and say, okay, Square Enix is worth like almost $6 billion. That's how much it would cost for Sony to come in and pick them up and acquire them. Well, a lot of times you go to a negotiation table and there's a lot of back and forth, and that number fluctuates quite a bit at times, right? Especially with a publicly traded company like Square, you have to appease the shareholders, the board, the CEO. There's a lot of money looking to get, a lot of people looking to get the money from this deal, because, well, a lot of times they'll take the golden parachute and they're off and really set out to a nice retirement at that point. So the money, I think Sony could figure out, and I actually think they could swing it, because they've discussed the idea of spinning off their financial branch, which none of us really think of Sony as finances, insurance, or anything like that. And they're clearly seeing that their entertainment business is the most lucrative for them, with PlayStation mixed in with their TVs, their sound bars, speakers, everything for the home theater setup. It ties together nicely, and obviously they have a huge hand in Blu-ray, so it just comes together really, really well under one umbrella. And on top of that, they do a lot with image sensors for their cameras, as well as for other devices that they'll provide that sensor for. So all of that has worked really well for them, and they seem to be more interested in investing in those divisions outside of the financial stuff. And with them spinning it off, they believe they can raise up to like $8.5 billion or something. That is an estimate over the course of the next 2 to 3 years. So an acquisition with Square, that might take some financing for now, but the idea that it will mature over time and they'll be able to pay it down rather quickly as they spin off this financial arm. So I think they could work that out if they needed to. Like, if they really, really wanted Square. And I will propose a scenario where they would actually buy Square Enix as we get further into the video. But looking at their current relationship with Square, they already get everything they want from them now without owning them. So the biggest thing people are saying they should buy them for is the intellectual property like Final Fantasy. You could also look at Dragon Quest or Kingdom Hearts, but there are a lot of licensing and other rights holders involved, whereas Final Fantasy is like solely Square Enix, right? So you buy Square Enix, and Final Fantasy is just exclusive to PlayStation. Kind of like how it is now, right? Like Final Fantasy 14, it's on PlayStation, all right? Final Fantasy 16, it's on PlayStation. Final Fantasy 7 Remake, Rebirth, they're just PlayStation games. See, Sony's figured out that they can kind of show up to Square, cover a lot of the development costs, cover the marketing, and also provide engineers for development, and Square will just have it as a console exclusive for Sony. Eventually, it'll go to PC, but Sony has shown that they themselves want to move stuff to PC, their own first-party games, so yeah, well, it doesn't matter if Square wants to. As long as they have a timed exclusivity deal in place of what looks to be about a year, they can align the Final Fantasy property with the PlayStation console and basically treat it like a first-party seller that will drive hardware sales. And yes, you can look to some of the multi-platform games like Star Ocean. That's coming up later this year, but like Sony already get that, and it's not a big enough property for Sony to say, well, we got to spend billions of dollars to get Star Ocean exclusively on the PlayStation. While I am looking forward to it because it looks pretty fun, I don't think that's worth billions of dollars to pick up an entire company. Now, Sony and Square do have other things in common, like the musical side. We see Final Fantasy, do pretty well there. Also, in other forms of media, we see Square Enix dip their toes into things like movies and series and other things there that Sony could work to prop up and even get out to a wider audience, but they could already kind of do that if they wanted through way of deals and partnerships. And in fact, I think Sony would be better off just continuing what they're doing now if they really do want to have exclusivity for some of these games, as they have shown that is their strategy, as opposed to spending billions of dollars on buying Square Enix. Instead, use that money for more strategic acquisitions, because it's very clear, based on what they've said, that they are still looking to do more acquisitions. Not necessarily just in gaming, though, as Sony is a large company. They would probably be looking elsewhere, especially in a technology field like, I think, AI. They'll look to most likely invest there, or continue sort of these smaller investments that they are doing into different publishers and developers. Like they bought shares in FromSoft, a parent company, I believe. And a lot of these platform holders, Nintendo even, will have shares or minority stakes in some of these publishers, like a Bandai Namco, like a Capcom, and others. So that is something they could do. Like we saw the large infusion of cash that they put into Epic, obviously around Unreal Engine, because they see that as more of a thing for the future with just entertainment. We see it showing up in movies now, and we see it obviously in games. And so Sony wanted to have a part of that. Now, the thing that I think could actually push Sony over the edge to buy Square Enix would be more of a defensive acquisition. And this is something we saw recently with Nintendo and Next Level Games. Next Level Games was looking to sell. The owners of the studio were basically like, hey, we're out. We're going to shop around and see if anyone wants to buy this studio. We've done a lot of work with you, talking with Nintendo. Would you like to be the one to acquire us now before we hit the open market? Nintendo decided to move on it, and they acquired Next Level Games, which is something that Nintendo doesn't typically go out and do, like go on the hunt for different studios to bring within Nintendo, but they've worked with them so much, and there was a potential for losing them. Like Tencent could have come in and picked them up, and then who knows what the future of Next Level Games would have been with their partnerships with Nintendo or anything. So they decided to move on it and spend millions of dollars to acquire them. In this case, we saw Microsoft outright draw up an entire plan looking at Square Enix. While I still am not 100% sure what a lot of the regulatory stuff is when it comes to an American company buying a Japanese company, especially of that caliber when we're talking about billions and billions of dollars, the fact that Microsoft was at least lining them up and figuring out what it would take to make it happen would make Sony at least somewhat like, okay, maybe we should keep an eye on this thing and just be ready as a just-in-case situation. And then I mentioned Tencent, NetEase, others. Again, I know there's a lot of regulatory stuff to go through, but if Sony hears that some of these larger investment firms, these larger companies are sniffing around Square Enix, they might call them up and say, okay, how can we work this out to where you don't go to one of these competitors in the gaming space, you come to us. However, I do believe Square Enix is best right now independent because they're doing a lot of really cool stuff right now, and to be honest, they are taking advantage of both Nintendo and Sony currently, and even Microsoft, because they're getting the Game Pass check from them from time to time. They're obviously having Sony put up a lot of money for things like these larger intellectual properties with Final Fantasy, and seemingly they're partnering with Nintendo for things like Super Mario RPG, so I kind of like where Square is now. They've leaned out a bit with their Western studios that clearly were clashing with them in Japan, so they've kind of spun them off, and hey, credit to Crystal Dynamics. They seem to have found a nice spot working on Tomb Raider and Perfect Dark currently. So I think where they are now is probably the best situation for everyone involved, but things change rapidly, as we've seen. So who really knows what the future is? But I do believe it, at this time, is a huge waste of money for Sony. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below, if you agree with me or disagree, and if you do think Sony should pick up Square. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.